Guys, it's Kate and I hope you're having a wonderful day today. I'm here with my Mei palette and a piece of New York Central cold press watercolor paper. It's a cotton, 140 pounds, and I thought we might have some fun today using a little bit of a different watercolor technique than I normally use on my channel with my little abstract doodles and stuff. I found a photo reference of a really fun jellyfish and I thought we would paint that today using a couple of techniques with lifting. Now, I am using a photo reference from Unsplash, but it's not going to be, realistic and lifelike. So don't have to worry about that. Just have fun with this easy painting. I'm going to be using a couple of different blue-green colors, and then in this palette, the rose red is what I'm going to be using for the pink jellyfish. But you can use whatever colors you have on hand. You can just get creative with your colors. But the biggest thing we're going to be doing is painting our background and then lifting our paint on the wet paper to create our jellyfish shape. And we're going to make this very basic just to do the technique itself. So first we're going to make sure to get our paper nice and wet. I am spreading it evenly with my brush, getting it nice and absorbed into the paper. We want to make sure we can work on a wet background for a couple of minutes because we're going to be doing a few different things. So if you look at the reference photo, you'll see that the blue is the darkest toward the top and the bottom, and the middle of it is just a little bit lighter. You can follow along with that, or you can just make your own colors. You can have a red background if you want, who cares? But the main thing is that you get everything covered, you're working wet and wet, and you have a nicely damp piece of paper. Now the background on this photo is the ocean, and it's very blue. And the closest color I have to match that that's in my palette here is fresh blue. But I'm actually going to work with blues and green. So I'm going to use the fresh blue and also the emerald green from the palette. Now I want this color to be very dark because we're going to be putting that jellyfish over the top of it, and we want to have a nice contrast. And that jellyfish is very bright. So I'm going to dip into my paint pan and just make sure that I've got a really good amount of paint coverage here, because don't forget your watercolor is going to dry much lighter than it is on your paper. So I've got a good amount of blue on here. I'm going to go into this emerald green and I'm going to put some green highlights. Well, highlights is a strong word, but I'm going to add some green in here as well to kind of mix up that blue color a bit and give us a little bit more of an interesting background. So we've got a lot of color here. I'm even going to go back into this blue just a little bit and just deepen up the bottom corners and just really get some strong color here on the paper. So the next thing we're going to do is, while our paper is still wet, we're going to start lifting paint. Now the jellyfish itself, if you look at the photo, we've kind of got like this sort of weird mushroom cap shape, and then it kind of trails down. So what we're going to do is grab our brush, grab a piece of paper towel, rag, whatever you want, and we are going to start lifting out this shape. So it's important that your brush is thirsty. I've kind of squeezed it into a point, and I'm going to start lifting out that shape. And this is why it's important that our paper is still wet, because this paint, once it sets, if it stains, then that can create some issues for us where we aren't able to get that brightness that we want. So rinse your brush pretty frequently, because you don't want to just put that wet paint back in it. And we're going to make that general shape. And I'm actually going to grab a little bit of a smaller brush because then I won't have to blot quite so much. And we're just going to keep blotting and lifting, blotting and lifting. And another thing you can also do is grab a paper towel or something like that will also work. Something to kind of keep in mind though is if you have a different kind of watercolor that you're working with, sometimes they can be staining colors and they're very hard to lift from paper. Also, if you're working on cellulose, it can be kind of hard to lift as well. So if you're not sure, I would just give it a test on a piece of paper so that you can kind of check and see if it is going to stain for you. So now I'm kind of going down the page and I'm working on these little arms of the jellyfish, and I'm just rinsing my brush periodically and just kind of moving along. Now what you can also do is take your paper towel and just go around like that, but you're doing a lot of lifting here. Now, as you can see, when we get sort of close to the bottom, you can see a lot more blue in that. So I'm not going to do as much dabbing, but I do want to make sure to get the top. Now, if you have some kind of stubborn paint, you can add some water. I'm going to grab a fresh paper towel and keep on lifting, just like that. The only thing that I kind of find is that when you're working with a paper towel, sometimes you can get some rough edges here, which I kind of like down here, but I really want to try to keep the top of my jellyfish smooth. So I'm just going to go over that again with my brush and smooth out that line so we can get a nice shape there for the top. I'm trying not to overwork my paper too much, but we'll just get up all the color that we can. Now that we have that, I'm gonna do just a couple of things to this background. So we kind of have a damp sheen here, and I want to add a little bit more texture. So you can take a fan brush like I've got here. You can take any type of smaller brush, and I'm just going to put down some very light water droplet splashes, and it's going to be showing up in your screen here in a second as they kind of develop, but this is going to add some texture to our page. So the last thing we're going to do before we let it dry is lift a couple of these little arm areas. So I'm going to blot my brush very well and lift the color here. And just keep blotting and lifting. You want as dry of a brush as possible. So I'm just going over the same line, getting this paint lifted and dabbing, and I'm taking a little bit of creative license here on the little tentacle things because I know this one doesn't come down like that, but this is fine. You can do whatever you like. Just make sure you're going over the same line to lift your paint. Now, if for some reason you have some paint that stains and doesn't lift, that is no problem because we can always go back in and add some white highlights at the end. But this will just help lift some of that color so you get some natural highlights. Okay, now I'm going to let this dry. Okay, we are all back and dry, and you can see this lovely texture in this nice little loose painting we have. Now, the next color I'm going to grab from my palette is going to be the rose red here in the corner, but any kind of red that you have in your palette that has kind of a pink look to it, just so that we can try to match that pink on the jellyfish in the picture if you want to match that pink. Now, we're not going to need very much pigment at all. So I dipped in my palette. I put some out here. I'm going to dip my brush in water and then put some more next to it. You can see there's a big difference. We're going to start with the lightest first and start going over this jellyfish. But if you see in the picture, right in this area here, there is a really pretty bright pink. So we are also going to kind of hone in on that a bit. So we're going to work on the top part first, and I'm going to go around that line that we created and get our little glaze there. Then I'm going to dip into the deeper color and kind of dot it a little bit around this edge. Now I'm going to take a little bit of creative license here because it's not dark all the way around, but I am going to add some extra pigment, and then we are going to let that go. Now, meanwhile, I'm going to kind of take a look here, and we have some of that blue that we left over on here. And if you can see in the picture, the pink bottom part of the arms kind of fades off into the background. And so with that, it's going to create a nice glaze when we add the pink to this, because it's going to be just a nice little sort of purpley color. So I'm going to start at the bottom, but first I want to let this kind of dry a little bit. I might even go back in with another layer. So I'm going to grab some more of that pink, and that is very deep. I'm going to dip my brush and mix some more over here so that it's nice and watered down, because we really want it to be nice and light. Now, if you put too much color on it, you can always blot it. I just made my brush damp, and I am going to be dragging up some of that pink. And I'm just going to dot in a little bit of color here and there, but not a lot. I'm going to dip a little bit out of there, dip my brush in water, and mix up some more of that pale pink. And I'm going to go along with this edge right where I was wiping it, and I'm gonna kind of let that color get deeper as we go. I'm gonna fill in a couple of these little rough sections just like we have in our painting, and I'm gonna let it come out. I'm gonna leave a very thin line here just so we can kind of have some separation between the top hood and the bottom part of the body. And even though we don't have like a white line there in the picture, I'm going to have that here for the painting. So I'm just dabbing my brush into this heavier pigment, and I am going to add quite a bit of that here down the edge. Now I am working on a very moist brush. I'm just kind of dabbing it off because I want to really just drop the pigment in here. And I'm going to deepen up a little bit of these edges, and I'm just dabbing my brush. I'm not doing much else. And just letting the paint kind of come off of that. Now I rinsed my brush and blotted it. I'm just going to help move this up a little because the top kind of dried, and so I'm just going to soften this edge very gently. And I really don't have any extra water on my brush. It's just ever so slightly damp. And then we have that nice deep white part. Now, while our little tendrils are still wet, I'm going to get a little piece of paper towel and we're going to put in some of our highlights. So I'm just going to kind of wind this up to a point and I'm going to do some blotting on here. Now I don't know how much it will really lift, but we're going to just do some blotting. I'm planning on also coming back in later with some kind of doodles over the top for the brightest of the highlights. But you can do some blotting to get up additional color. You can also use a brush, dab it. You don't want to drop a bunch of water on the paper because that's going to create those blossoms. But if you dab your brush and just kind of go over it a little bit, just to moisten it a little, the paint lifts much easier, if you can see that. But I'm just gonna go through and do a few little blobs. Next, I'm gonna dip my brush into this pink again, and we're gonna work on these little tendrils. Now, I'm not trying to fill in the whole section because a little bit of that white outside is gonna give it some more contrast with the background. So it'll kind of act a little bit as its own highlight. I don't know if you can see that. I'm going to actually zoom in just a little bit so you can see. And now we can overlap a little bit with our body too. Now these I'm kind of imagining they come from behind the jellyfish. And so we've got that there. I'm going to add a little bit more color to this side of the pan and really get this good and mixed. And I'm just going to add a little bit of detail here. And this is going to add sort of that final bit of contrast. I'm going to let this go and get even deeper again. I really want to get that bold pink because that's really the really interesting part of our painting. Now I'm just going to lightly go over this, soften it just a bit where we have some of our shadowy areas. And then I'm going to come right up here and just add a little bit of an outline there. Now, if you look at the picture, we've got some highlights up there, and that's really what I'm going to be adding with my pen. So I am just going to come through here now, and that's a little bit too dark for me. I'm going to just add a little bit of water because I just want it to be lightly contrasting, and I'm just going to add some interest here, some texture, so that we have some variable shades in our arms. And you can see where you have those kind of ruffles that come out. So I'm basically just loosely recreating that, and you do not need a lot of pigment. Like you can see here in my pan, I barely have any pigment, but it makes a big difference on the paper. And you don't want to do it while this is too wet, because this is where you have some of that texture that you want, but just very light texture. And we have just some sort of twisty areas. I'm going to add a little bit more of this color, a little bit more water. And I'm using my very fine brush, and I'm just kind of going and adding these different texture areas. So you can just darken up very slowly, just like that. And then we have a lot of really nice texture there. See, even that is like really too dark. Okay, I'm going to let this dry again, and we're going to come back in and add some of our highlights. And I think this is the perfect thing that could use a little bit of glitter or shimmer. So I'm going to grab some of my metallic watercolor too and just add a little bit of it. In this palette, we have a flash pearl, which is this silvery one, and it doesn't really add any color, but it does add some sparkle, and I think that is just what this could use. So I'll see you in just a minute. All right, we are dry, and I'm going to do a couple of things here. I am going to add just a little tiny bit more pink to this painting, but that's even too much. I dipped into a little bit more water, and I'm going to add that sort of hood that's underneath there. So I'm going to dip into water again and drag this down. I don't want to use a lot of pigment, but I do want to add just a little bit more color here, and then a little bit more of those little marks. Now that I'm dry, I can actually add that texture in here. And so I'm just going to get a little bit of paint and deepen up and make those little sort of lines, these little texture areas of deeper color. Because this is kind of where the hood comes down over the edge there. And so we've got our pink there. And I'm going to add even more water and really tone this down. And I'm going to add just a little bit on the top. And I'm leaving that little spot of separation, which will also be a little bit of a highlight. So while the top part here is drying again, I am going to come down here to the little tendril thingies. I guess they're the legs, the arms, whatever they are. Let me zoom in a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to be working with my O5 Jelly Roll. Now, you can actually add highlights a lot of different ways. If you don't have gouache, it's actually a wonderful thing to have because you can actually mix it with other colors instead of just using white. You can use a white jelly roll. You can even use a little X-Acto knife and very lightly kind of scrape away a little bit of the surface. That is only a final touch. Don't watercolor over that if you do it that way. But that's going to basically tear away a little bit of the watercolor and bring you back down to your paper surface. So there's a lot of different ways to add highlights. You can even start with masking fluid before you paint, but I'm going to use my jelly roll. Hopefully it works because sometimes it doesn't. And if it doesn't, I may also or instead use some white gouache. I'm just going to come in here, and if you look at the picture, there's these little kind of ruffles that come down through here, and that is one of the prettiest parts of the jellyfish. Now I'm going to hold this as a close-up to show you. So you see those sort of light areas and the darker areas where I had added that second layer of paint. I'm going to kind of follow some of these outlines for those little ruffles, and it's just going to give me a little bit of guidance for my drawings. So I'm just going to start slow, or maybe start at all. This is what I mean with these pens. Let me try this one. This is the 10 tip. So, okay, I'm going to end up using this one. But you can kind of see these little ruffles. And I'm just sort of making these very light shapes. They're broken, they're kind of jagged and zigzaggy, and they're going sort of all over the place. And I'm trying not to be too much in one area or kind of like going back and forth, back and forth. And then we also have them kind of come out, and you can see these little lines kind of coming up. And so we're just going to add some hints of those. And you can see just all the way down. I'm just sort of meandering along, and just add a little bit at a time and just these little hints of lines. And this is going to kind of fade away. So I'm just going to have little hints of whiteness down here. So it's not going to have all that detail. I'm going to come back up here and add a little bit more. And we've got kind of some lines right there. And I'm also going to add just a tiny little highlight next to our legs, these little tendrils. And so I'm going very easy with my pen. I'm even allowing it to have a little bit of a broken line. I was trying to use the finer tip, but since I can't get that to work, I'm just gonna go for it this way. And this just really helps transform the painting and adds that brightness in there that we really need. So I'm going to feel up here. That looks like it's pretty well done. In the photo, there is a really hard edge, and you can see the jellyfish compared to the background is a very hard line, and there's kind of a highlight at the top. I'm just very lightly dragging my pen. You can see it's a broken line, but it's going to just add that little hint, and this is just making it pop off the page. And so I think that that is great for the pen. The last thing I want to do, because I guess I don't need to do the gouache, is add a little bit of sparkle. So I'm going to work on getting this activated with my small brush, and I'm not going to use a lot. But this area right here at the top where I left free, I'm going to add a little brush mark of some sparkle there, and I might add just a little to some of these little tendrils. And this is just fun and completely optional, but when you hold it up to the light, it's just going to add a little bit more life to our painting. Okay, and then lastly, and I'm going to make sure I don't have a ton of moisture on my brush, I'm just going to kind of quickly brush up from the edge here all the way along the bottom. And you can't see it head on, but once I hold it up to the light, you'll be able to see. And it's just going to be subtle. So let me give you the close-up here. You can see our marks. And really, you know, you need a couple of coats, but this is not hard to do. And you can see that sparkle right there on the page in the light. And that, I think, is a really beautiful effect. So I hope you enjoyed this video today. I know I did. Hopefully it gave you some ideas for some paintings, and I don't know, this was a lot of fun to do, and I don't usually do things like this on my channel here, but I'm so glad that I did, and I might try more paintings like this in the future if you enjoy it. So if you do like it, give it a thumbs up. Leave me a comment below with your thoughts. If you want to see more like this, make sure to subscribe to my channel. Thank you again for watching. Have a wonderful day, and until next time, keep creating.